Thank you for joining us online here at Fam Church as we conclude our series, Winning Team. Now, if you haven't already, please click the subscribe button below to subscribe to our YouTube channel and go out to Facebook at facebook.com/famchurch. And now, our lead pastor, Brian Lane.
I want to welcome again any first-time guests that we have with us. We've got quite a few because Stephen and Sierra brought their whole family. We want to welcome you, and we are glad that you are here this morning. And if this is your first time in church or your first time in a long time in church and you're saying to yourself, what on earth I'm doing here? Or maybe mom said to you this morning, I'm not going to feed you unless you come to church. We're really sorry about that, but we think that God has something for you this morning in today's service. And we've been going through this series called Winning Team, and this is the third week in this message series, and we feel with this series that if we apply these principles to our life, if we take them and put them a part of our church, that it's going to help us to win both personally and as a church. Now, I mentioned last week there are many parts and pieces that need to come together when you have a winning team. You need to have an offense. You need to have a defense. You need to have coaches that know what they're doing. And like in football, you need to have a quarterback who really knows what he's doing because he's the general out there on the field. And so he needs to know how to read defenses and manage the offense and do all of these sorts of things and execute the game plan. And all of these things are aspects to a winning team, but those are not the things that we've been focusing on in and with this series. We're looking at things that are a little bit different, a little bit more foundational to be a winning team. And last week in our series, we looked at endurance. We saw endurance was a vital part of what we needed to have in us to create a winning team. We found that last week we need to be able to endure hard times. We need to be able to endure difficult times in life because whether we want them to or not, hard times are going to come. See, we've been told a lie in the church that if you're a Christian, that everything is going to go smooth and well, that if God's for you, there's never going to be any problems, any issues, any complications. And so we're just going to have money, we're going to have a nice house, we're going to have a nice car, we're going to have a great family, all of our children are going to be the most amazing children in school. And then we get into life and we discover that that doesn't work quite that way. And the reason is we live in a sinful, fallen world controlled by darkness, and that darkness is out to destroy anyone who walks with God. There is active conflict between the light and the darkness. The darkness is actively trying to take us out, and we need to understand that just like any conflict, there's going to be casualties. So in order to persevere, in order to endure the things that we're going to face in life, Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 3 gave us a framework, an outline to make it happen. And first of all, it tells us to remember those who have gone before us and will be able to endure. We're supposed to look back and look at those who have gone through things, gone through trials, gone through struggles, gone through problems, gone through issues, gone through situations. And we can look back at them and say, look, their faith made it through. They made it through based on their faith. And because they made it through, we can make it through. You know why? Because we are as strong as they are. Because we are as focused on God as they are. Because we have the passion for Jesus that they have. Regardless of what we think of ourselves, we can make it through that struggle in life. The second thing Hebrews 12 tells us is that struggles are part of life. We're not going to avoid them. We're not going to live free from them. We are in conflict. We are in war. Stuff's going to happen. Don't let it shake you. Don't let that push you out of the race and keep you from winning the prize. And then finally, we need to keep our focus on Jesus. If our eyes are turned towards Him, if our eyes are turned towards Jesus, it will give us the strength to endure. And if all of us incorporate that into our life, those three items, we are going to win and find ourselves in the winner's circle. So will our church. And that was last week's Endure to Win. And so in this last morning of this message series, ask you guys a question. It's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer out loud. But have you ever built a team and had it be a complete and utter disaster? See, a couple of years ago, it was in December, I had this idea. I said to myself, I need to clean out the youth closet. I need to paint the sound booth. And so my plan was, let's recruit a few of the teenagers to help make this happen. Well, there was one kid in the youth ministry. He came to me and he said, hey, pastor, guess what? I painted the whole inside of this one guy's house. And so you need help with painting? I can help you with that. And I said to myself, oh, that's awesome, because when I was in college, I worked for a painting contractor, and so I understand painting. I can do most painting. I can cut usually without tape and those sorts of things. And so I thought, man, him and I, we'll be able to knock this thing out in no time. And so I get the young man to the church, and I'm like, okay, we've got to paint this thing. And he starts painting the sound booth with me, and within minutes, there's a complete disaster on my hands. And I said to him, dude, what's going on here? I thought you said you painted the inside of a guy's house, his whole house. And this is what he said. Well, yeah, I kind of got fired from that. I said, okay, how come you didn't tell me that first? I said, what happened? He goes, well, I kind of got a lot of paint on the carpet, and so they had to replace all of the carpet in there. And I got paint on the kitchen cabinets. I got paint on all the bathroom stuff and paint on the ceiling. And literally, he just went in there and was just like with paint and got it everywhere. It cost the guy more money to fix the mess that this kid had made than it cost for him to paint and get this thing supposedly cleaned up. And so when I teamed up with him, it was a disaster because it took me twice as long to paint as it would have if I would have done it myself, because I had to clean up all the messes he made. And one of the messes I couldn't fix because he took black paint and painted it all over red brick. I'm like, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? Nobody told you to paint any brick. But today, our third component, our third piece in this puzzle of getting into the winner's circle is teamwork. And so I think, or this morning we're going to look in the book of Nehemiah. We're going to look in Nehemiah chapter 3. Nehemiah is in the Old Testament. It's after Kings and Chronicles. If you don't have a Bible with you, I will put it on the screen behind me so that you can follow along. But Nehemiah is kind of like the picture of teamwork when you think about it in the Bible. But let me set up Nehemiah because it'll help us understand what's going on here, okay? About 100 years before Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem, some bad stuff happened in that city, okay? All right, the Babylonian army had come from across the desert and invaded the land, and when they got to Jerusalem, they wanted to keep the city in one piece, okay? They didn't want to destroy the city, but what happened was that the Jews just couldn't stop rebelling. Every time the Babylonians would set up a new governor, the Jews would plot, the Jews would plan, the Jews would scheme to try and get rid of this guy so that they could get their city back. Okay, and this happened several times, and finally the Babylonians said, you know what? The only way we're going to be able to take this city is if we go in there with our army and level that sucker to the ground. And so that's exactly what they did. They brought this large expeditionary force across the desert. They arrived in Jerusalem and completely leveled the city. They knocked over buildings. They burned all of the wood. They just left it a complete pile of rubble. Everything in the city was destroyed. And then they took, and all of the people that were living there, they then shipped them off to Babylon as prisoners, as captives. And they were able to go there and live. But it was a very tough and difficult time. Well, about 70 years after that happens, this other empire rises called the Medo-Persian Empire. And the Medo-Persian Empire takes the city of Babylon. And what they decided was the best plan for them was all of these people that the Babylonians had brought captive to their land was to send them home, tell them to go back to their homes, go back to their cities, rebuild everything, and just start over again. And so that's what happened. Many of the Jews who were in Babylon, they left and they headed back to Jerusalem. And when they arrived, they found it utterly destroyed. The buildings and walls were leveled, as I said, and the people, they walked into the city, they just saw this mess, they just saw this disaster, and they just said, gosh, that's a lot of work. And so they just kind of started doing their own thing, building their own homes on top of the rubble, hoping for better days to come. But see, that's not what God had planned for the city of Jerusalem. This is not what God had planned for his people. One day, there was a man named Nehemiah, and he was in prayer in the Medo-Persian Empire. He was there in prayer, and God came, and God spoke to him and said, you know what? I need you to go over and fix this problem. I need you to go over and fix this issue that I have got in the city of Jerusalem. And his prayer is found in Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 5 through 11. We're not going to read it, but he just gets burdened for the city of Jerusalem and his fellow Jews. And so God says to him, you know what? I need you to go and do something. I need you to go and be the man to fix the mess that's in Jerusalem. And so Nehemiah, he says, well, God, you need to give me the strength to go before the king and ask the king to go, because if he doesn't want me to go, I could be in a lot of trouble. And so he went and asked the king. But the end of chapter 1 is one of the most important lines here in this text. It says, I was a cupbearer to the king. And you may say, well, why is that so important? Well, this is of huge importance because of who the cupbearer was. Okay, the cupbearer was the person who poured and tasted the drinks given to the king to make sure they weren't poisoned. You see, back in the day, kings really didn't get elected, okay? There weren't elections and that sort of thing going on. And once a king got into power, there was very few ways to take him out. But one of the ways to take him out was to assassinate him. And if you think about all the different means of assassination back then, it would be kind of hard. They didn't have sniper rifles. They didn't have C4. They didn't have all of this great stuff that we got today to kill people from a distance. They had to be up close and personal or do something like poison the king. And so this was one of the most popular ways to assassinate a king that they wanted to get rid of. So the king had to have men who were there to taste their food, to taste their drink. And if the person who was tasting the food, who was tasting the drink, fell down, passed out, died, whatever, the king knew not to eat the food. But this meant, because of their role and position, that the person who was the cupbearer had to be trustworthy. Why? Because if you had enough money, you could bribe someone. Okay, you're the cupbearer. Here, I'll give you $1 million. Drink the wine and then slip this little pill into it, and nobody will know what happened. He'll just die, and we won't, And so the guy who was the cupbearer had to be incredibly trustworthy because the king had to be able to trust him with his life. And so Nehemiah going to the king and saying, you know what? I want to go to Jerusalem and rebuild the city. I'm tired of being here and being your cupbearer. I want to go and serve my people was a big deal because the king couldn't just go to monster.com. He couldn't go to Indeed. He couldn't go to Career Builder and put a post out there for a cupbearer. Okay, it wasn't something you could do because it had to be somebody that was incredibly trusted by the king. And so the king was taking a risk in letting Nehemiah go, but Nehemiah was also taking a risk in going off, getting rid of his highly paid, cushiony, nice, comfortable job to go and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. And the first thing that I want to pull from Nehemiah is that Nehemiah didn't see something and think it was somebody else's responsibility to take care of. Okay, Nehemiah looked and he saw the need of his people and he said, God, use me to fill the need. God, put me on the team that you are going to use to complete the work of rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. See, he knew that he had something to offer. He knew that he had something to give to the work. He knew that he needed to get on the team because what that team was going to accomplish was much greater than what he was going to do by himself as the cupbearer to the king. And the same is true for us. See, what this team, Fam Church, is trying to do is much greater, is much bigger than whatever it is we are trying to do, whatever it is we are trying to accomplish in life. And I'm going to get to why in a few minutes, but we're going to continue on here. Nehemiah, after he got the call and the king released him, headed to Jerusalem. And when he arrived, he surveyed the damage of the city and found it like he thought it was going to look, an absolute disaster. But he didn't let the absolute disaster discourage him. Instead, he said this to the men in Jerusalem. This is what it says in Nehemiah 2:17 and 18. It says, Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began the good work. See, Nehemiah saw the gate or the condition of the city. He saw the absolute disaster, and his response wasn't, man, that's a jacked up mess. I don't want to get involved in any of that. No, his response was, look at this. With all of the people that are here, we can put together a team that can rebuild the walls and can rebuild the city. He saw that as a team they could do this. They could accomplish this. Now, he did seem to be the only one that saw this, at least at first, because the people that had resettled the city were so overwhelmed by the project, they decided that they needed to focus on what they could do, and that was to build a home to live in. There was no team mentality. How do I know this? If you go to the book of Haggai, which is an Old Testament prophet near the New Testament, but he rebukes the people living in Jerusalem during this time. Why? Because all they cared about was building their house. He tells them, you live in paneled houses, but yet the house of the Lord is in ruins. He rebukes them because they didn't want to go out and get their hands dirty. They didn't see the need to go out and build back everything up. They only cared about themselves. So Nehemiah says, no, this is not the way it's going to be. We are God's people. We are a team. And as a team, we are going to do this. And this is what happens in chapter 3. And I've got the whole chapter to read, and it's a lot, and it's already 12 o'clock. And so, hold on. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work to rebuild the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated as far as the Tower of Hananel. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section of Zakur, son of Imri, built next to them. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassanah. They laid beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section. Next to him, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, made repairs, and next to him Zadok, son of Baana, also made repairs. The next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work unless they were supervisors, okay? The Jeshanah gate was repaired by Jehoiada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, son of, I can't even say that one. They laid its beams and put its doors with the bolts and bars in place. Next to them, repairs were made by the men from Gibeon and Mizpah, Melatiah of Gibeon, Jadon of Meronoth, places under the authority of the governor of Trans-Euphrates. Uzziel, son of Hahariah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section, and Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Rephaiah, son of Harel, ruler of the half-district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section. Adjoining this, Jedaiah, son of Harumaph, made repairs opposite his house, and Hattush, son of somebody, made repairs next to him. Malchijah, son of Haram, and Hashub, son of Paramoab, repaired another section of the Tower of the Ovens. Shallum, son of Halohesh, rulers of the half-district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. The valley gate was repaired by Hanun, the resident of Zanoah. They rebuilt and put its doors with the bolts and bars in place. They also replaced 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the dung gate. The dung gate was repaired. How would you like to have that job? You get to fix dung gate. Was repaired by Malchijah, son of Rechab, ruler of the district of Beth Hakerem. He rebuilt it and put its doors with their bolts and bars in place. The fountain gate was repaired by Shallum, son of Kol Hoseh, ruler of the district of Mizpah. He rebuilt it, roofing it over and over, putting its doors and bolts and bars in place. Okay, I'm not going to continue to read all of the things in this section, but it just continues on with the list of names and the things that they repaired as the wall slowly came back together. And the first thing that I noticed here was that for a team to win, they had to get rid of the eyes, and they had to see that we was much more important. See, in order for work to happen on the wall like it did, all of the people had to decide that what was happening with the wall and in the city was more important than being and doing their own thing. They had to decide that tending their crops, fixing up their house, and running their business had to take a back seat to what was important, rebuilding the wall. I mean, some of them, we saw it in there. They didn't want to do hard labor. They were like, well, we'll be supervisors. We won't do the hard labor. But for most people, that need took a back seat to the team. The fact that some of them didn't feel good, I'm sure, took a back seat to the team. The fact that it cut into their family time, I'm sure, took a back seat to the team. But in order for the Israelites to win at rebuilding their city, the team had to come first. And see, there's going to be times in the church and in our lives where the team has to come before anything else in order for us to win. If you follow football, there's a guy from the Seattle Seahawks named Cam Chancellor. He was their safety, and he's been holding out, okay? And Seattle, well, he was holding out, got off to an 0-2 start. They haven't won a football game. And so Cam Chancellor, he's making $5 million a year, and he says he needs more money. I'm just not sure about if he needs more money. But he said it finally this week. He said, you know what? My team is off to an 0-2 start. It's much more important for me to put on my uniform and suck it up and get paid only $5 million to play football than me to sit on the bench or sit at home. See, he sees that, you know what? The team is more important than him at this point, regardless of how ridiculous his demand seems to be. And if we want to win spiritually, and in order to win spiritually, we need to be a part of a team, and we should not hold out. This means we need to be part of a church, a body of believers. Too many people think today that your walk with God can happen on its own. Do you know what? That is just not possible. Because who's going to pray for you when things are going wrong in your life? Who are you going to go to and talk to when stuff is going on? Who are you going to come to and say, I need help in certain situations if you're segregating yourself, if you're keeping yourself from the team? Because when we don't think we need the rest of the team, we get beat up. We get beat down and usually don't make it to the winner's circle. And see, the reason we get beat down is because of this thing I talked about last week, of this conflict between darkness and light. See, Satan is out there looking for someone to destroy, and you know who the easiest thing is to destroy? The person off by themselves, right? Because think about it. When a lion hunts zebra, do they attack the whole pack? No, they try and get a zebra separated from the pack because it's far easier to take that zebra down when he's separated from the whole pack. And Satan does the exact same thing. When we're a believer and we're walking with God and we say, you know what, I don't need his help in order to do this. I'm going to go off on my own. Basically what we're saying is, hey, Satan, if you're looking for somebody to chew on, I'm over here. Okay, that's what we're doing in that spot. And usually people who go off and do things on their own don't make it to the end. They end up a victim of Satan and his attacks. And they don't make it to the winner's circle. The second thing that I see in this text is that work happens faster as a team. Nehemiah gives us a list of names after names after names and the work being done. The walls, the gates, the rubble being cleared from the streets. And if we were to continue to read in the book of Nehemiah, we would see that it took them 52 days to rebuild the walls and gates. I mean, just think if not many people had wanted to help. They'd said, Nehemiah, you got this. You got 5 guys. You guys can take care of this. Would the wall have been rebuilt in 52 days? They'd probably still be working on it right now if it was Nehemiah and his buddies doing the work. But see, Nehemiah let the people know that God wanted to do this. God wanted to rebuild the walls, but they all had to work together as a team. And with his words, they got fired up and they got ready to work. And you may be saying to yourself, well, Jerusalem was a small city. Well, Jerusalem wasn't a huge city, but it was a fairly decent-sized city. In the decades before it was destroyed, there were about 30,000 inhabitants in the city. To build a wall around a city that has 30,000 people living in it is a pretty significant wall. Now, it's not the Great Wall of China, I will give you that, but it is still an incredible feat to rebuild a whole wall, rebuild all of the gates, get the rubble cleared off of the streets in 52 days. There's no way Nehemiah would have been able to do that or accomplish this without his team. And see, the same is still true today. Work happens faster with a team. I mean, when the house gets messy, it gets cleaned faster when everyone pitches in and helps. I mean, one day I came into the church and I'd walked in here and Lisa was in here and she's picking up chairs from this section. It's like she'd been working on it for a while, getting chairs. But meanwhile, when we had our missions banquet back in April, we had everyone stay behind, and in 30 minutes, we got all of the chairs off the floor, we got all of the tables down, and we were ready for our banquet. Work just happens faster when it happens with a team. But it's much more than something like picking up the chairs in the sanctuary. It's also about the eternal work that we can do. It happens faster if we work as a team. So if I were to be honest and look around our church and our community, we would see, like Nehemiah, that there's a lot of work to be done. in Mulberry. We have thousands of lost people living in this city. But at the rate we are accomplishing the work, it's never going to get done. And it would go faster and get done better if all of us stepped up and did the things that God was calling us to do. See, the church is a moving machine that God has given the authority to crush the gates of hell. But a lot of times the church moves with the momentum for the task that they're doing to barely ring the doorbell at the gates of hell. That's not what we are called to do. We are called to stand up, take up the work, move the church forward, and knock down the gates of hell in this city. And so let's work as a team to get that done. We can do this. I think we can do this in the next few years. But everyone needs to jump in, join the team, and play their position to make it happen. Because what happens if we don't play our positions? We get beat. In football on the defense has what's called gap assignments. They've got a gap that they're supposed to protect. And if you are not disciplined to protect your gap, you open up the other team's offense to make big plays. Fam Church has been given a gap. Fam Church has been raised up in a city where many people's lives are being built on rubble. They're living in an absolute disaster, and we have the hope. We have the message of hope for them. But we have to be willing as a team to come together and say, you know what? We are not going to let the people of our city, we are not going to let the people of our community enter into a Christless eternity. We are going to storm the gates of hell to help them and show them what their life can become. But see, it takes a church that says, you know what? We want to win at all costs. We want to win. We want to do this together, get out there and build something great that'll take down the gates of hell in this city. And so in closing, we've got something coming up, as Lewis said in the video. We've got Hope Fest coming up in a few weeks. This is a big outreach. This is a total team event. This is an event that we as a team, if we execute it, can start advancing the kingdom of God and taking down the gates of hell in this city. And we all have a part to play in it. There's two parts that we have to play in this. First way, I mentioned last week we're going to take a special offering for Hope Fest here this morning. And so the first way is to give financially so that we can do what God has called us to do for Hope Fest. And then the second thing is to get involved in Hope Fest, to sign up, to be a part, to see God do something in our city. Because I believe that He wants to do something great through Hope Fest this year. I believe He wants to reach people. I believe He wants to touch lives. I believe that He wants to bring Jesus to people who don't know and who haven't seen.
I really hope you enjoyed that message from our series Winning Team. If you did, please click the like button below to let us know. And if you have any questions about us here at Fam Church, go out to myfamchurch.com. And thank you once again for joining us online at Fam Church.